I have no use for a woman who can't have children. I'm marrying this woman and I'm going to have such beautiful children with her.
I demand that any incompetent wife in childbearing divorce my son. He deserves so much better than an infertile whore like you. And this young lady is going to be an infinitely more capable wife who will give me the grandchildren I hope to see soon. We will take this house and you will leave us in peace. Unless you want to stay with us by paying us rent and by becoming our lowly housekeeper. You really don't know anything, do you? I decided to tell these people floating around in their stupid delusions of grandeur and splendor the all too shocking reality of the situation. Ignorance truly is bliss, but only until its nemesis, truth, descends from the heights of goodness to make things right. My name is Gail, and I'm a 38-year-old office worker. I've been married for 10 years to my husband, Jay. Unfortunately, even after a full decade since tying the knot, we have no children yet. I've always wanted kids, but I'd always thought my future husband and I would act on it when the timing was right. That was the initial plan with Jay, too, the only problem being that we've completely missed that timing. If you're wondering why, hold your horses, I'm getting there. Another dream I always had was of building a house. More specifically, I had always dreamed of building a house without having to take out a loan from the bank. So ever since I was hired into the company I now work for, I was working my hardest, as well as making lots of compromises in order to save up as much as I could. I worked for a large company and had a relatively decent salary, even at the beginning. I didn't have children at the time, nor did I have a commitment to another person as I do now. So I was willing to put in more effort and time to work, extra hours, work on weekends and holidays, and successful business trips have all paid off in the end. I'm positive that all my hard work was why I earned the position of section chief. The most important thing I keep in mind when I do most things in life was efficiency. And a lot of my decisions took this factor into careful consideration. I was often able to go home on time without working extra hours because I was efficient at my job. After I married Jay, I was also in charge of the housework. And although it was difficult to work and then go home and take care of the home, I became more efficient at working both and got used to it within a month. As for my husband, Jay worked for a small company, but he was never really able to keep a job, and instead worked one job for perhaps a couple of months before quitting and applying for another. It's actually been a while since he's had a full-time job, so him getting a position in any company is obviously out of the question. More recently, he'd been working part-time and moving from place to place more often than usual. I couldn't think of how many times he had changed jobs in the 10 years of our marriage. But I figured that since I was making more than enough money to live a good life as a married couple, it wouldn't matter much if he didn't make much. We didn't share our income, so we were both using the money we made for our own purposes. I had been saving up every month since I started working in order to build a house, and I had finally reached the amount of money I'd wanted to save to realize that dream. Since saving money is also my hobby, in a sense, I had accumulated considerable money. I didn't have children yet, but I wasn't too old to have any. I decided to build a house to have a bright future as a family, considering we would have children one day. When I talked to my husband about my dream, he was a little worried.
I don't have any money. What am I supposed to do?
Oh, don't worry about it, honey. I have some money saved so we can borrow a little as a small loan and build a nice house for our nice family. My husband's face lit up when I told him that. I guess he wanted to build a house too. We had been living together in a cheap apartment in order to save money, so I couldn't blame him if he wanted to live in a bigger house. We decided to build a house, but because my husband had no credit score due to the fact he was moving from one job to another, he could not get a mortgage, so I had to be the one to take one out. Jay, a proud man in his own way, said he would pay me back all of the mortgage. I thought it was a nice gesture on his part, so I asked him to make monthly deposits into my bank account. With the help of my parents, the plan was quite astonishing in the sense I was going to be able to pay off the mortgage in full in no more than 5 years. We only borrowed $50,000 for the mortgage. The rest of the money came from my parents and my own savings. I felt sorry that they had to pay for our house, but my parents said they would help us as much as they could because if anyone had a big mortgage or loan to pay back at a young age, saving up wouldn't be possible. So, we moved into our newly built house after some time. My husband was thrilled about how it turned out and thanked me every day. He indeed was grateful. I could see it in his eyes. But he never once paid me back any money for the mortgage. I knew he didn't have much money in the first place, so I didn't really mind, but I found myself wondering where in the world his manly pride went. And then, after we built the house, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Xander, often came over to our home. It's not that my mother-in-law and I had a bad relationship, but she was one of those people I didn't want to have anything to do with if I didn't have to. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. Whenever she came over to my home, she would say something along the lines of, "Hey, are you gonna give me any grandchildren yet?" Mrs. Xander would always pester me about not having any children just yet. "You know, I haven't had any yet, and everyone around me, all my friends and my neighbors, is bragging about how many grandchildren they have. I always feel so left out, and I feel so miserable. When are you planning to do that? How long have you been married again?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Xander, I can't make the decision of conceiving a child on my own. You'll have to ask Jay if you want some answers." "I can't ask Jay that." "When do you think you're going to have one? You're so close to the end of your life as a woman. I suggest you stop thinking and start acting quickly, dear." "Yes, ma'am." What the hell did she mean by close to the end of your life as a woman? I couldn't get that strangely ominous line out of my head. Jay once told me that she often got into trouble with her neighbors because she would blabber on and on about her own feelings without considering the feelings of others. I think I finally understand what exactly he meant by that. What can't be done, can't be done. So it can't be helped. And my husband was often coming home late these days because he says work was making him pretty busy. I never understood why he came home so late if he didn't have a great full-time job. But when I say something to him, he says sarcastically,
"Oh, I get it. You're a woman working for this large conglomerate, and condescending little office men like working for a small subsidiary company is your cup of tea with honey biscuits, isn't it?"
I couldn't say anything back because they would take anything I said the wrong way. I was worried about him having an affair with another woman, and you can't blame me for suspecting that. 1, he was coming home unnaturally late for someone working a physical job in a factory. And 2, I had no idea if work was even what he was doing during the time. But I knew he just didn't have the money to be able to cheat on me, so that suspicion lasted a brief moment before it was quickly expunged. But the fact remained. My husband was coming home late. And that meant we had less time for us as a couple. We could never have sex, let alone get me pregnant, despite my efforts to make it happen. And yet, Mrs. Xander never ceases to pester me about it. And with every passing day, it became tougher and tougher to endure. When I tell my husband about it, he cooperates for the night, but the timing was never right, and I never got pregnant. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye as we continued to do this. I was able to pay off the mortgage successfully. Jay did not pay even a single penny in the end, but I told him the mortgage had been paid. Then his attitude, along with his mother's, changed drastically. The first major change was that Mrs. Xander suddenly came to live with us. without me knowing about the plan. One day when I came home from work, my husband and mother-in-law greeted me on my return.
Welcome home, honey. So listen, starting today, Mom here is going to be living with us. You don't mind if she does, do you?
Thank you for giving me such a beautiful house. Wait, what? What do you mean?
You know I'm an only child, right? I never knew Dad, and caring for Mom is my most important job.
Like I said, I'd never heard anything about her moving in with us once the house was built. So I was evidently surprised. But there was no way I could tell Mrs. Xander, who had already moved most of her stuff in, to go back home, so I had no choice but to allow her to move in with us. After that, I had to endure my mother-in-law's tormenting every day, and it just got worse with every passing hour, it seemed. When I came home from work, the same goddamn nagging. Have you finished cooking dinner yet? You still need to finish cleaning the bathroom. Just because you work doesn't mean you can slack off in the housework, dear. Keep your room clean too, alright? And that was but the tip of the iceberg. The worst part was that she always acted as the innocent angel, and she never said anything in front of my husband. But every time we were alone, just the two of us, she would always have something to complain about. And even though Mrs. Xander had moved in with us, Jay still didn't come home until quite late at night. He used to come home before the sun went down, but lately he came home in the very early morning, zonks out on the couch, wakes up from my footsteps coming down the stairs, takes a bath, and goes to work. I barely had a chance to talk to him anymore by that point. And my mother-in-law, who must be aware of the situation, of all people, never failed to disappoint when it came to pushing me to have grandchildren. I don't understand how she could think we could possibly have a child under these circumstances. I just didn't get it. Does she really think a stork will bring her a child in a little white bag of cloth or something? A few days later, I came home from work to find an unfamiliar pair of shoes lined up at the door along with Mrs. Xander's shoes and Jay's. I thought it was a door-to-door saleswoman who had dropped by to perhaps negotiate a deal. So I quietly entered the house. I made my way to the living room, where my eyes locked with those of my husband, who was sitting on the big couch with his arm around a young woman. His body language suggested he thought he was very important in that moment, and it was as though everyone was waiting for me. He beckoned to me like I was a servant to His Majesty.
Divorce me, please. I have no use for a woman who can't have children. I am marrying this woman, and I'm going to have such beautiful children with her. You have no place here, and I want to divorce you.
I demand that any incompetent wife in childbearing divorce my son. He deserves so much better than an infertile whore like you. And this young lady is going to be an infinitely more capable wife who will give me the grandchildren I hope to see soon. We will take this house, and you will leave us in peace. Unless you want to stay with us by paying us rent and becoming our lowly housekeeper. My mother-in-law presented me with the divorce documents. I was stunned because I didn't understand what had just happened. And then the woman whom Jay seemed to be having an affair with laughed and said, You know, I'm pregnant, unlike you, you infertile hag. She informed me of her pregnancy with a proud, condescending tone. To that squeaky, high-pitched voice of hers, she told me that her relationship with Jay had been going on for a year, and that the pregnancy had been strategically planned. The plan was to be carried out just as I finished paying off the mortgage. Jay says he can't live without me, so I'd like you to end it with him, okay? But just like Mrs. Xander said, you can stay on as a housekeeper if you want to. But we expect you to pay for your share of water, electricity, gas, and everything else you may be needing from our commodities. I had absolutely no idea what these people are talking about, and my mind was blank. I put this house in my name, and I personally made the payments. I took out the mortgage, and Jay promised he would pay me back. He never did.
Why don't you just change the name to mine?
That's a great idea. You seem so miserable, Gail. Honey. I understand you don't want to give up the house and your darling husband, but give in. There's no way out of this. As for the division of property, I'll just take the house and I'll do you the favor of claiming nothing else. I'll feel sorry for you if I left you penniless and homeless after all. Oh, Jay, darling, this is no time to be gallant. In times like these, you just have to shun them firmly and completely. 3 people floating around in their stupid delusions of grandeur and splendor. These bird brains really didn't know anything. You guys don't know anything. When I said that, they looked at me and laughed hysterically. They probably think I'm a sore loser, but they couldn't be further from the truth. I was just about to destroy them with my knowledge of how the law in society works. More specifically, I was going to tell them about the division of property regarding houses. I went over this very thoroughly with the bank when I first asked for a mortgage 5 years before. Since the house is in my name and has been paid for almost entirely with money I had saved since before I got married to Jay, in addition to the money my parents graciously offered, it was not eligible for division of property. Furthermore, there was no property division whatsoever because the couple's joint savings amounted to exactly 0. They had to live on Jay's savings, as well as Mrs. Xander's, and the savings of the woman whom Jay was having an affair with, whose name was Opal, by the way. If you want to live in this house, I will sell it to you then. Then you can repurchase it yourselves. Then you can keep the house just as you hoped you would. As I laughed, Jay and Mrs. Xander finally seemed to understand the gravity of the situation.
Wait, hold on just a minute. Are you saying I'll be left with nothing?
Pretty much, yeah. Jay buries his face in his hands once he's heard these words uttered. I laugh at my husband's cartoon-like depression. He reminded me of Tom, the cat, when he discovered that sexy female cat had cheated on him and cast him aside like a piece of trash. Mrs. Xander was also looking at me, but it was as though she was trying to look through me, trying to figure out what to do. And then I remembered an additional detail that could make things more interesting, and decided to present it for show and tell. I just thought of something that you'll have at the end of all this.
Oh? And what's that?
A lot of debt.
We don't have any debts, Gil. Isn't that right, Mom?
No, we don't, honey. We don't have any debt. I'm sure of it. Not yet, you mean? But I'm going to demand alimony. The cause of us divorcing is because of your infidelity. And then they both kneeled on the floor, begging for my reconsideration. I don't have any savings, Gail, my dear. I depended on you for my life expenses. So I spent the money I had on cards because I didn't think I'd need it.
I don't have any either, Gail. I spent all the little money I had on Opal here. And you know I don't make that much money in the first place.
The 2 slime bags with their pathetic excuses. I didn't give a good goddamn about their situations. They brought them upon themselves, and fixing them was none of my business. And Jay, my darling husband, if you never had much money, why did you choose to have an affair with a materialistic gold digger and divorce me? Perhaps he didn't think that despite introducing his lover to me in person, there would be alimony to be demanded anyway. I'm going to charge you alimony there too, Opal. Wait, what? Why me? You knew I existed as Jay's wife, and yet you still went on with the affair. You're an accomplice in his crime, and the law states you can be penalized too. But I'm pregnant, Miss Gale. Are you seriously going to ask for alimony despite this? And what was she talking about? How could a functioning member of society think that she would be immune to any demands for alimony if they had an affair with someone else's spouse and had a baby with them? Honestly, the idiocy of these three blockheads knew no bounds. And also, I must apologize, for I've recorded every single thing we've just said to each other ever since I got home. We record them at work too, for the sake of making records of conversations. Good thing I'm a creature of habit.
No frickin' way. What am I supposed to do?
I thought I told you already, Mr. Xander. Borrow money. Buy the house back, pay me the alimony you legally owe me, and then you can enjoy your life in this beautiful house. Can't we come to some other arrangement? You don't have to get divorced if we can't handle it. Let's all just live in the house for now as we discuss a compromise. I burst out laughing at my mother-in-law's outrageous suggestion. All three of them fell silent, most likely horrified at the fact I was laughing like a madman. After wiping away tears, I finally said, I'll send you guys the papers through my lawyer, so I'll just keep these divorce documents for now. With that as my parting shot, I left the house. Since the house is in my name, they couldn't sell it without my permission, which, needless to say, they'll never obtain. I went back home during my next holiday and had the movers move all my stuff. Most of the furniture and appliances inside the house I bought with my money, so the house was almost completely empty by the time the movers had moved everything out. My husband was there at the time, so I told him, the house is already on the market, you know? The auction is next week, so I suggest you pack up what little stuff you have and leave within the next few days. And Mrs. Xander, too, obviously. If you don't leave, I'll call the police and report you for trespassing.
We used to love each other. How could you do this to me?
Because you betrayed me. That's all I said, and I left the property, never to return. Later on, my divorce with Jay was officially finalized. And of course, I succeeded in evicting them all from the house. How do I know this? Because all their belongings were reported to be gone by the time the house was sold. The alimony from both of them was paid in one lump sum. My lawyer said they called every day to negotiate a lower price for the alimony, but of course, all of the pleas were coldly rejected, as they should have been. I demanded $60,000 from my husband and $40,000 from his lover, Opal, making the grand total of $100,000 from both of them. Soon thereafter, since my husband had a habit of moving from one job to another, he quit his job again because he thought the salary was too low, and he couldn't make enough money to pay off his debt. Then he got a new job, and although the salary was better than his previous job, it still implied he had to struggle to keep afloat. I recently heard a rumor that he quit his job too because the salary was just not enough, and now he's working a questionable job. I don't know if he's making good money with this job, but the fact is, it's a shady job is clear. It's not the kind of job a father with a kid on the way would willingly choose to support his family. Opal is also in debt, and looks like she left the child with her mother-in-law, the glamorous Mrs. Xander, right after they were born. She is now working to make ends meet. Mrs. Xander is stressed about not having money and about raising a child despite her financial situation. She and Jay seem to be fighting every day because the stress of the debt is taking a toll on them. But they have no choice but to live with the three of them and the child, so they are trying to cooperate. At least they still have some humanity, but it's a shame because this is the child that Jay had always wanted, and the grandchild Mrs. Xander had always wanted. I hope they teach it that this is what awaits one that willingly betrayed someone else. I decided to repurchase a new house because I had enough money even after I paid off the mortgage. Of course, I had the 100 grand in alimony, and this time I wanted to live with my parents, so I got them to help me. I bought a beautiful house that was on sale this time, so the price was fairly less compared to before. My parents were happy to live with me, but Dad laughed, saying,
Your matchmaking days are still getting further away, sweetie.
I'm happy to be back in a family environment where we can joke around like that again. For the time being, I'm going to work hard at my job, just as I always did. Perhaps I hadn't learned my lesson about marrying someone, since I do hope to one day marry a good man with good intentions. But I'll be faithful to my happiness and keep walking forward to make me and my family live the fulfilling life they deserve.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread. hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that?" "Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.